Yes.
Pretty well? Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Tara Bell. I am the board chair of the Rainbow Cafe. I am also the founder and facilitator of the Southern Illinois Pride Fest. And you are joining us this evening to be part of our series for Pride, of our Zoom events and conversations, various panels that we've engaged in. And I'm excited tonight to bring you a panel of really dynamic individuals who are going to be sharing their experiences with and discussing their experiences with conversion therapy. So with that said, I do want to thank the Conversion Therapy Dropout Network, as well as the Trevor Project. I do ask that everyone mute yourself unless you are actively speaking. Claire has a good point about the camera, and the other reason you might want to mute your video is because we are indeed recording. If you would like to put your device on speaker view so that the person who is actively speaking is the main face that's featured on camera, that's probably going to be the best way. And we're just going to go ahead and dig into this. So I had asked each of our wonderful panelists to send me a bio. And as I was reading the bios, they were so intriguing, and everyone here has so much experience. And it dawned on me that listening to me read a very basic bio is probably not the most exciting thing. So I chose instead to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and take approximately 5 minutes to tell a little bit about their personal stories and their experiences in order to give folks an idea and a sense of whom everyone is. So I do ask, as our panelists introduce themselves, they provide their pronouns as well. And we're going to go in alphabetical order tonight. We will start with Matt Ashcroft. Matt?
Thank you so much for having me. And I have to say, from the bottom of my heart, Curtis, thank you for making Conversion Therapy Dropout Network the most diverse panel that I have ever been on. You should be proud of all the work that you have put into this, because it is phenomenal that you would have me, a gay black man, a non-binary person, a trans woman, all to be on a panel. You should be very proud, first and foremost.
I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
So my name is Matt Ashcroft. I am a conversion therapy survivor that resides in Toronto, Canada. I did my conversion therapy at Journey into Manhood and Christopher Doyle. So when I was in Journey into Manhood, I remember stuff like a conversion therapist would have a punching bag on the ground horizontally, and then me beating it with a baseball bat in resemblance of my dad, because it was an overprotective mother and an absent father was the reason why that I was gay. There was essentially, it led me into vulnerability where I had to succumb to a lot of what they had to say. I had to listen and to get in line, per se, of what I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to act. It essentially left me into a depression to the point where it could have ruined my life. Honestly, when I was in conversion therapy, and this is how I know Sam Brinton, is I watched the Vice documentary while I was in conversion therapy, and I was like, is there something that they don't know? What about me? Like, what don't I know? What am I not seeing? And one of the biggest things is there's nothing wrong with being queer, trans, or non-binary, because we are fine just the way that we are, and we are diverse, and we're loving, and we're all different. And now I'm currently working on Bill C-8 in Canada, which is one of the first of its kind, where it's not just for minors, but for adults as well, and for gender expression. So we are going to, I already did the first passing, and we have some really amazing advocates in Canada that is helping to push this past, and I'm thankful for every single one of them. Thank you so much for the space. I would love to continue this panel.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was awesome. All right, let's move on to Sam, and let's remember pronouns. Sam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam. Can someone give me a thumbs up? Audio is good. Great, thanks. Awesome. So hello, everyone. My name is Sam Brinton. I use they and them as my pronouns. A little bit of my background right now is that I serve as the Vice President of Advocacy and Government Affairs for the Trevor Project, the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention program for LGBTQ youth. My more connection to this work is I founded the 50 Bills, 50 States campaign, which in a matter of a couple of years helped to quadruple the number of states working to end conversion therapy here in the United States. Where we're excited to work with Matt, but we were definitely concentrating on the US at that time. I am a survivor of conversion therapy, and before I go further into that, I want you all to recognize that you're about to hear a lot of really hard stories from a lot of different people. There's a lot of time that we need to take care of ourselves. So if any point of the conversation gets too hard, there's a reason I wear sparkle. Think of the sparkle, don't think of the pain, and move on into a space that is safe for you. So I know when I was hearing Matt, that was a little bit of a hard moment, and I'm gonna have to keep having those hard moments. So just make sure that you're taking care of you as you go through this, okay? So a little bit about myself. I'm the child of Southern Baptist missionaries, traveled the world sharing God's love, and ended up accidentally coming out to my family by my attraction to a Playboy magazine. The response of my parents, the horror that they experienced of me coming out was only met basically by their desire and goal to save me, to fix me. This happens to a lot of LGBTQ youth. I think the hardest part for us to remember is that this isn't always our own choice. It may be called our own choice, but it definitely, if I would have had any recognition of the trauma I was about to go through, I would never have chosen this experience. I was given a lot of mental, what I now call very close to torture, of being told I was the only gay child left alive, that I had AIDS, that my God hated me, all of these horrific experiences, trying to basically scare me straight. When that didn't work, we moved into physical aversion therapy, where I was basically, hurt while I was shown pictures of men holding hands. So I would associate the pain with the experience and the imagery. I was very young, and so it still kind of haunts me to this day. I can go further into my story in the future as needed, but it's not actually important about the story. What's important is kind of also what got me to where I am today. I realized that I'm not alone, right? That I am not broken, that I have moments of pain, but that those make me into what I like to call, right? Like, broken glass can still be beautiful. That's how we get the stained glass windows of the Notre Dame Cathedral, right? So I'm not calling myself as artistic as the Notre Dame, but I'd like to say I'm a little bit glitzy, right? So I hope to bring to this conversation the perspective of an organization that obviously hears from survivors each and every single day on this issue, and one that is working to do everything we can to make sure that the mental health of survivors and of the LGBTQ youth community as a whole is taken care of. Because, and I know we'll get into the next survivor next, but let's all remember that if conversion therapy wasn't an option, the idea of choice wouldn't necessarily be there. And think of how differently discrimination would look if people were not thinking that we were just choosing to be like this. I think you'd see a lot of different political movements would go a lot better in our way if we could just end conversion therapy as a whole. So glad to be here, excited to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Wow, Sam, thank you so much. I'm loving everything I'm hearing, and I'm totally moved right now. All right, let's move on to Curtis.
Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Curtis Galloway. I'm the founder of the Conversion Therapy Dropout Network. So we're an organization that caters specifically to the conversion therapy survivor and their well-being to build a community. Super excited to be here. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. You can use either one interchangeably. And my story, I grew up in Southern Illinois. I'm very, very good friends with Tara. She's one of my closest friends, and it's actually because of Tara that I am where I am today. So my story started back in high school when I was 16 years old. And I come out to my family and they kind of took it okay, but then they slowly like slid into, this is a choice and this isn't what we wanted for you. And so they ended up taking me to a counselor in Kentucky, Mayfield, Kentucky. And, he really drove a wedge between me and my family. And that was his whole goal. That was the whole thing. And instilling shame in not only me, but shame on my family because it's their fault that I'm this way. There was a lot of different tactics they used. A lot of it was just tearing down myself, telling me that, I'm not correct. I'm essentially broken, right? The broken glass thing, but they didn't know about sea glass yet, so apparently it didn't work. But it was really painful for me when my parents would tell me that I wasn't what they had intended, that I wasn't the person they wanted me to be, and that God was, at one point they told me that God was speaking to them and telling them, that they need to change my sexuality. So, it came to an end mostly for financial reasons, but also because my family didn't see the improvement that they wanted to see in me, the improvement. And they noticed that my mental health was slipping and that I was getting into a very dark place and that I was pulling away from everyone and just isolating myself, which may or may not have been the intent of the therapist, as it were. He was very isolating me. It was one of those divide and conquer kind of situations, where if we can get him away from all of his friends that tell him it's okay, and then we feed him information, he'll change. But it really came to a point where my family just realized that they were going to lose me. And so they just made a 180. So my parents are a success story as well, because they're now very supportive. Don't know if they're on right now. I can't see everybody, but I'm sure they'll watch it later if not. But yeah, a lot of what I have today and where I am today and being able to talk about my stories because of Tara. She actually, I met her while I was at Wren Lake College, and she told me that what I'd gone through was conversion therapy, and I had no idea what that was. And she helped me kind of gather the courage to reach out to the Southern Poverty Law Center and report my conversion therapy. And then from there, they got me in contact with Equality Illinois. And then I became the key testifier for the ban of conversion therapy in Illinois. And then from there, I did various other things before landing in LA, very far from home, where I founded this organization. So I'm very happy to be here and very happy to be speaking on a panel with all these wonderful people. So, thank you.
And thank you, Curtis. All of those shout outs move me as well. Thank you. You're the one though, right? I mean, I don't need any credit for that. You're the one. Okay. All right. And last but not least, Clare Killman. Clare.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Clare Killman. Thank you all so much for joining with us, being at this event with us. I'm really working through this with us right now. I'm the Midwest, the resident Southern Illinoisan here. I live in Carbondale, Illinois. I went through conversion therapy when I was 14 years old. I grew up in Southeast Missouri. My mother is the chief financial officer of the General Baptist Church, and my father's a deacon in the local church that we went to. So their social status was inextricably linked to the religious hierarchy to which they had attached themselves. And so when they found out, when I got outed as both transgender and bisexual, I wound up getting put in conversion therapy. Like on the face of it, the more superficial reason was like, we have to save your soul. But then the underlying deeper reason was like, we need to safeguard our own social status and really say like, we're doing everything we can to get you to change. And that was really what I felt like as an adult. That's become more and more apparent to me. But really you could feel it, you know, and I may not have been able to internalize it then, but that's really what it was all about. I went to Pure Heart Ministries, which is run by Jim Venice out of St. Louis. And once I was old enough and stable enough, I fled Missouri and hopped the river to Illinois. And I consider myself to be like a refugee from religious persecution. And now I live here very happily with my 2 partners and 2 dogs and 2 cats. And apparently I have 2 of everything, but I'm happy. Yeah, happy to be here with you all and engaged with the work that Curtis has given me the opportunity to do here in Southern Illinois. Thank you, Tara.
Wonderful, Claire. Thank you so much. And I would also like to point out that Claire is the facilitator for the trans adult group that is hosted by Rainbow Cafe called Transformation. And Claire has also spoken for us at several events. And Claire, I appreciate you tremendously. All right, so we're going to dig in to several questions that we have pre-prepared. And this is going to take a little bit, but that's okay. We can go over time if we need to. As the panel wraps up, I will be fielding some questions from the chat. So if people want to post questions in the chat, I'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll be able to get some audience participation involved. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the first question, and we're going to go in alphabetical order with this as well. And this also has a lot to do with faith, this first question, which I think is very relative because a lot of you folks have already mentioned faith. The other thread that I am hearing is this familial disconcertation, so to speak, with how sexuality might reflect upon the family as well. So there we go. Many conversion therapy programs are faith-based or tied back to faith. What is your relationship to faith, and how has it changed as a survivor of conversion therapy? So let's go ahead and start out with Matt.
That's a big question. So I used to be very religious. So I used to be Pentecostal. I didn't really have a good relationship with the Pentecostal church that I was in. Mostly because it was, I remember the pastor, actually I haven't talked about this in any interviews, but the pastor would read something from the Bible, and then he would say, I am sick and tired of you people looking like the world. Look at me. I look like a man of God. Look at you. You look like the world. It's either you change or you get out. So I didn't feel welcome. Like, I didn't know what I identified as when I was young, but I knew that I didn't want to like have that hatefulness, like of what I view as hatefulness, and just like be pushed out like that. And so I remember I was struggling with religion when I was in conversion therapy, and when I was out of conversion therapy, I was alone. I didn't have anybody. I didn't have a lot of support from the people, from my Christian friends. And so I don't really have a faith right now. And and there's a couple of reasons, because I don't believe in hegemony, hegemonic practices where it's a top-down approach that dictates the lives queer, trans, and non-binary people. I don't think that's fair. What I do feel that we all have in common is there's a guy, Dr. Gabor Mate, who's actually one of my heroes. And he said that people are looking for 2 things. Everybody's wanting to know who they are, and everybody is wanting to be in tune with themselves. We all need to have people to have that. And so that way that we develop a community, just like the Conversion Therapy Dropout Network is doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. All right, let's move on to Sam. Sam, would you like me to read the question again, or do you kind of have an idea of where we're going here?
I mean, I submitted it, so I'm totally good with the question. No, thank you, Tara. I appreciate that. This is an important question for me, in large part because we'll get to a question later on, I'm sure, about we're only legally able to do so much. And so how a person relates to communities of faith is really important, not only because of how we respond, but also what we're thinking of. So at the Trevor Project, a quarter of the youth that we interact with via our national survey said that faith was either very important or somewhat important to them. That is significantly higher than most people were assuming. It doesn't mean that everyone is a person of faith, to be very clear. Just like Matt mentioned, a lot of people have a strong aversion to faith because of how it has treated them. And that is completely valid and should be supported. And Claire's comments of like faith refugee status like is very, very important for us to talk about how faith has been misapplied to create such traumatic experiences for those whom we love. At the same time, there are people like myself who still strongly identify with faith. That doesn't mean that we try to convince everyone to uphold the tenets of our faith, but I try to live a good, faithful life and hope that people will similarly see that Sam is a good person and identifies as a person of faith, so maybe it's not all bad. But at the same time, I want us to recognize that that's one person's application of a faith. My relationship to faith is complex. I left my faith, came back into it following a very long story, but an experience in China where I found an underground church and was recognizing that like these people were willing to die for a faith that I had thrown away. Why was that? And what could my relationship to it be different? How could it be different? But the more important part for me is what are ways that I can practice my faith and at the same time protect people from faith. I think that is really, really critical. Let's not assume that my work and my good relationship to faith should come at the expense of others. That is the most important part, is that like, if I can do anything in this world, it should be to make sure that the lives of my fellow LGBTQ community are better. And that takes a lot of different ways of going about it, right? We're going to talk a little bit about this, but like there could be work that we can do with churches to help them stop doing conversion therapy. If they recognize the harms they are causing, maybe, not always, but maybe they will do better. Not always, obviously have a lot of work to do in that space. But that was a long and winding answer, Tara, but I think the best and simple example is, what is my relationship to faith now? Good. What was it before? Bad. What should it be in the future? Better. That's how I want my faith journey to be, is towards something that will still do good. That is a complex road. The Venn diagram of faith and LGBTQ community is like the most oppositional Venn diagram out there, because those of us who live in both worlds are basically told that neither side of our identities like each other, and it is a very lonely space there. However, I'm lucky to have people like Curtis and Matt and Claire who recognize that my faith doesn't need to hurt them. It can just be part of my life. And that's a really beneficial part of the community, is when we start to say, well, that works for Sam. Crazy, but in that world, but like it works for Sam. Great, good job. That's, I think, what a good faith will have to be all about.
Thank you, Sam. Give me one moment. I'm going to admit a new participant. There we go. All right. Sam, can I just acknowledge once again the fabulous dress that you're wearing, and how much I love this, and how I feel like the glitter and the glitz and the glam is very reflective of all of these different facets of your personality and your spirituality that you are expressing to us this evening. All right, Curtis, do you need me to read the question?
No, I've got it. Yeah, so for me, so my conversion therapy was, it was faith-based, but he was also a licensed counselor. So like, it was a mix of both. And I wouldn't say that I was ever really tied to I was raised Christian, Disciples of Christ. I wouldn't say I was ever super involved. It was never really my bag. There's some people that are really about it, and like that's what they think about, and but that was never really my thing. And so now afterwards, it did strain my relationship with Christianity quite a bit, because I was at the receiving end of, like the Christian weapon, as it were, right? When they would use the Bible as a weapon to, harm me, right? So it really did damage my relationship with it. And it took me a little bit of time to kind of get over that. And I do recognize that there are Christians out there that are just as devout as the other ones, or devout as other people. But I also recognize that there are some out there that use it as a weapon, and they use it for themselves. And I think that that's my biggest issue, is that that there's, and we're seeing it more now, like, oh my gosh, just every day I hear something about how someone is using Christianity as a weapon, like people using it as means to not wear a face mask, right? Like, it's ridiculous. And so I find myself still getting frustrated with that, even afterwards. For me, I've never been really, really close to Christianity as it is, as an establishment, as what people think of it. But I wouldn't say that it ruined it for me. Like, I didn't completely turn away from it, right? I think there's a higher power. I've really kind of turned into self-empowerment is really more of my thing. That the higher power, can empower you, but you should do it because you have the ability to do so. I've always struggled with the concept of what is advertised as Christianity, and I think that there's more to it than that. And I think that I'm not sure if conversion therapy would have shaped that differently, but that's where I am now. So.
Thank you so much, Curtis. All right, moving on to Claire. Claire, do you need me to read the question?
No, I think I've got it. So, in case any of you are unaware, we have First Amendment rights, and one of those is the freedom to practice your religion. But in its modern interpretation, that constitutional freedom that we all share is used by evangelical cults to engage in some of the most horrific child abuse, and it's state sanctioned. So that really is that's my short answer. I could go into a little bit more detail, and I probably will. So, like, I was raised in the church. I don't think I ever went a week without being in church less than 3 times a week. And this is for like multiple hours. We were Baptists, so like services were short, but then you've got like Bible study, like youth group, Sunday school, multiple services. And it's like that's your social world, right? Like your social world in the small rural southern Missouri community that I grew up in. Around the town, on every single hill, there is a massive church. And there's about 2 industries in Poplar Bluff, where I grew up. One of them is finance, and the other one is the church. And you can just see that when you drive through the town. Like, the most elaborately built buildings, the things that appear to be what the town's trying to put on its front face are financial services and religion. And so I come from a culture where it's just like seeped into the social fabric so heavily that I know what it's like to have your entire social world ripped out from under you, because it is so closely tied to like some religious dogma, and people would ascribe their social status to the church that they went to. That was just the world that I grew up in. And on a certain level, like my parents both got pretty high up within their faith bodies. And to me, my association with like religion is, at least organized religion in its most massive iterations, is that they're closer to money mills than they are like blueprints to living your life well. In my opinion, I think Jesus Christ, if this individual existed, was a wonderful human being who absolutely lived by what they said. And in my opinion, they were anarchistic. They railed against, dictatorial, authoritarian figures who would do harm to the least of these. And I think that those are some really wonderful values. I just wish for evangelical America that they do better as far as living by those values goes. And that I know so many really wonderful, beautiful, good Christians in my life now as an adult. And like, I hope every single one of them is absolutely furious that the state-sanctioned child abuse is still permitted by other Christians and other faith bodies all over the country and the continent.
Thank you, Claire. I know some of this is difficult to talk about, going back to Sam's preface at the beginning of this, and I think it's probably going to get harder, so let's all dig in here. We've tried to kind of line these questions up to where they flow into one another. So this next one is a little bit longer, but connects right back to this concept of faith. Many conversion therapy survivors, many states have banned conversion therapy in professional settings, but those bans don't apply to religious institutions because of the protections of their First Amendment rights in the Constitution of the United States, which Claire just mentioned, right? What strategies can we employ to help those suffering in conversion therapy administered by religious institutions? And I want to point out, this particular question is a call to action. What strategies can we employ, right? Okay, so Matt.
So in Canada, it's actually different. So we actually have laws in place in Canada where we find where we can fine people $10,000 as if you are caught practicing conversion therapy. So you can actually do that as a fine. I'm actually I've been actually discussing with people to up the fine to $50,000 because I feel that it's necessary. So that's my short end of the story.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Canada. Go Canada, absolutely. Okay, Sam.
Oh, Matt. Okay, to be clear, of the four of us, I already know that I'm most likely to be the, like, quote unquote conservative part of this conversation. So take what I am saying as partially Sam and partially like I am operating in a political system which I can only do so much. We, as I said on a panel like about a week ago, break the system. I'm totally down for breaking the system, but with the current system, this is what I can do. So I'm going to just preface that with, we're not moving to Canada, go Matt, but I'm sticking here. What can I do? So a couple of things that we can do. First would be we have to be careful with how we talk about, for example, fining a pastor, because again, that could lead to severe ramifications in the United States for pushback. Now, that's not something that's currently allowed in the United States, but what we are able to do is in some places, you're allowed to do what is called, you're allowed to do the consumer fraud angle. The consumer fraud angle is that if a person is charging money, so if it's no longer just like a pastor parishioner conversation, but more of a charged money service, you are able to, and if it is found out to be consumer fraud, in some places you're able to bring a case forward on that because money was exchanged and poof, it still didn't work, right? So I want my money back. That is a really good way of kind of going about it in one space. I am also arguing, and we are in the midst of, I'm really proud of this, Trevor Project is putting together a report and a guide specifically for pastors so that they know what conversion therapy is and its harms, and from an evangelical angle, why those harms are worse, quote unquote, like than the original sin, I'll put in quotation marks, right, of homosexuality. It's not that this is a thing, like think of the LGBTQ youth that you're hurting. And so we're kind of going about it less into the space of what is the legal way of stopping pastors, but more of what is the persuasive way of stopping pastors. Pastors don't, I agree with Claire, it is child abuse. It is awful what they are doing in so many places. And at the same time, I don't think pastors always recognize how harmful it is. Or at least I'm the Pollyanna of the world and pray to my God that they do not know how much horror they are causing because they think that they're doing it to save their child. That's what my parents did. My parents put me through conversion therapy because they thought they were saving me, not because they hated me and wanted me to go through this experiences. So one would be a consumer fraud angle, right? That's not everywhere. We're working with the Federal Trade Commission and others, but like that's not everywhere. You can't, in some states, for example, like they don't have great consumer fraud protection, so you couldn't do that. Another would be persuasion through pastors. And I think a final piece is more going to be what some of the work that we do is with the actual like faith-based counselors still get accredited. So back in I think it was 2014, that accreditation board said that that conversion therapy wasn't great. We'd much rather them say that it's worse than not great, but and I think there will be some angle of like remove an accreditation if a person is found to be doing these kinds of harmful activities. Why? Because a mother is going to, or father, to be very clear, a parent is going to try to look for the best services for their kids. I do not think that a parent is going to say, like, I want to talk to Uncle, Tim. No, they want to go to someone that can actually help, and they will look for some series of marking that will hopefully give them that guidance. So we should go after every single series of that accreditation or, stamp of approval. We should try to take all of that down so that way pastors don't have the, I would call, veil of professionalism. There is no professionalism in conversion therapy, and we should remove any veil, any notion of that veil through any means necessary, through most means necessary, through legal means necessary, to be very clear. Sorry, just because I'm speaking for a national org that I need to be very careful. So, Tara, hopefully some of that was helpful. I am pretty sure that Curtis and Claire are about to destroy my answer there, but I think it was a good one to start with. So friends, remember that I'm speaking for a national org who has to be very careful.
Oh, Sam, thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Somebody give me a thumbs up. All right, thank you. I think your point about consumer fraud is right on. Yeah, and noting the huge differences between, Matt's conditions in Canada and what we look at, and not even nationally, but state by state within the United States, right? I know that in Illinois, we do have the ban on conversion therapy for licensed therapists, and there's not a whole lot we can do as far as the religious providers. However, that consumer fraud clause right there is what a lot of folks are able to work with. So just putting out that kind of buffer for you there. I'm going to go ahead and move on to Curtis.
Hi. Yeah, no, Sam, I agree with everything that you say. I'm not going to tear you apart. You're absolutely right. This is one of the big catch-22s kind of is that, we have these bans that, we're pushing nationwide, but when it comes down to it, it's not going to stop it. It's going to make it harder, and it's going to absolutely educate people on what's going on. I remember back when I started working on Illinois, I would talk about it and people would be like, oh, that's a thing? Like, I didn't know that was still happening. Isn't that something from the 1920s? I'm like, absolutely not. It's a thing that's happening still today, very prolifically. So it becomes very difficult. And that consumer fraud angle is very, very poignant. For instance, my conversion therapy story, had Illinois banned conversion therapy, my parents would have, or that counselor would have not been able to administer conversion therapy to me because it would have been consumer fraud, because he would have been billing my parents that live in Illinois with an Illinois address, and it would have been illegal. right? And he was a licensed counselor. But for people that go to just strictly religious-based places, it becomes a lot more difficult. Because then you get into, record keeping, and you get into, the confidentiality between, parents and a pastor, and they're not held to the same standard that an actual, everything's with air quotes, of course, with someone that's licensed by the state. There's not that oversight, and it becomes very difficult. And more what I'm seeing now, I'm seeing a lot more religious organizations kind of take up the mantle. And it's concerning. It's concerning. They're kind of going around it the other way around, where they're saying that, well, we can't do this legally with a counselor, but that doesn't mean that a pastor can't take the same concepts and do the same thing. I think a lot of it comes through education, and that's the best way to combat it, at least for right now. We are in a very particular situation in this country, I think, where we've got two extremes, and if one side says one thing, the other says the other thing, then I can't go and talk to somebody that does conversion therapy and tell them that they're wrong, because they're not going to care. They're not going to listen to me. They're going to tell me that I'm wrong, right? So it becomes very, very difficult. And I think education is the biggest part, is educating people about our stories, educating people about what conversion therapy is, making sure that people know that it's there, and teaching people to not necessarily call it out, because that could endanger the person in the practice, but just know what it looks like, and so that they can, for instance, if it's someone that's in a church, right, and they find out that their pastor is doing this, maybe not necessarily go up to the pastor, but someone that's close to them would be able to be like, hey, I have this information. I think we need to have a talk about this. That's ultimately what it's going to take. There are different ways to do it, like Sam said, but it's a yes and answer. It's going to take both, because you can throw legislation at people all day long, and people still aren't going to follow it. I think we're seeing that a lot today. So that's my.
All right, thank you so much, Curtis. Okay, Claire, would you like me to read the question, or are you good?
No, I think I've got this. So, I probably sit at the, where Sam sits at the farthest, most conservative here. Not even say that Sam is. I probably sit the farthest, radical on this, to the left, where on the one hand, I'm the board director of an organization that helps conversion therapy survivors in post, right? So after they've gone through the conversion therapy, our mission is to build a stronger community for them and a soft place to land. But I'm also a person who's experienced conversion therapy, and on a personal level, I have a lot that I feel and want to say about this. So when I hear people, Sam, say in their heart of hearts they want pastors to do better, or they're looking for the best in them, I think that's the case of really good pastors who probably may not do conversion therapy to start with, or who may jump ship. But for someone like Jim Bennis, the conversion therapist who administered my conversion therapy, he would go on record in papers, in magazines in the mid-2000s, which is around the time that I suffered conversion therapy. And he'd say that he would compare his client-to-pastor relationship to that of a dog trainer and a dog, where he would compare his conversion therapy victims to literal animals, and he would talk about them in these ways very, very dehumanizing. And I also think that in a state like America, in a federal system like America that respects private property, it respects capital, that the roots of consumer fraud that Sam's taking is brilliant, right? That is a brilliant way of coping with the really harsh realities we have here in the United States, because oftentimes the law respects property over people instead of people over property. But our constitutional rights are supposed to protect us, right? Like, they're supposed to protect the living, breathing human beings that are in the United States. And in my opinion, this is like Clare Killman personally, I know it's hard to really like choose language around this subject because you can get pushback from religious organizations, but I think we need to seriously consider crafting the language as a community around like what it looks like to push for a First Amendment, like amending the First Amendment, or like changing the language within it to also include freedom from religion, because I feel like how many more children are going to have to message our organization that we just can't do anything for? You know, how many like teenagers are going to write in because they're asking us for help, like crying, pleading with us in order to get away from their families about to send them to conversion therapy? Like, how many more times is that going to happen before we stop letting children get abused if they don't want to get abused? And that concludes my answer.
That was really powerful, Claire. Tara, I promise I'll let you speak. That was really powerful, and I appreciate that. So I'm definitely not quite ready to amend the First Amendment yet, but I do appreciate. I get that. I think Claire caught on something, which is it is hard to hear those messages. It is gut wrenching to hear those messages, and all four of us, right, get those messages all the time. And there's so much that we can't do, and that is heartbreaking. I think Curtis's point about education is going to be one of the only things we can do right now. But well said, Claire, for calling out why we have this question, which is the pain each of us are experiencing because we don't have another lever to pull. So bravo to you for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. A community that promotes love and acceptance has a hard time being loving and accepting, huh?
All right, thank you so much, both Sam and Matt, because I'm about to do a whip around on that same question. And first of all, Claire, thank you. Burn it down, right? Burn it down. I'm going to read the last line of that same question again, okay? And I want us to look at this question not from the perspective of legislation, but rather from the perspective of working with human beings. Okay, so here we go. What strategies can we employ to help those suffering in conversion therapy administered by religious institutions? How can we help those who are actually suffering? And this might be when that youth messages you, when that adult messages you, etc. How can we help those people? And we don't have to go in order. Just any one of the four of you pipe in here.
I got something. So one of the things I said previously, it was everybody's looking for two things. Everybody wants to know who they are, and everybody wants to be in tune with themselves. All we really need to do is treat people like people. Listen to people, try to figure out what they're about. Not to like have a standard of like an expectation of what somebody should be, but let that person be what they be. You know, there's a lot of like shaming in communities when like churches where they know little to nothing about a person, and they don't want to know because they have this heteronormative, this hierarchy, this hegemonic stance of this is who I am, this works for me, and this has to work for you. It's not okay, and never was meant for us. And if we start treating people like people, we wouldn't have this issue.
Yeah, so when I've seen those messages, it's very hard, because I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm, this big organization that can, send someone out and whisk the person away and save them. Like, it's just not feasible. I love it, but it's just not feasible. Take them to a safe place. But, the first thing I always do is, I tell them, we're here for you. and we're here whenever you need us. Because there's not really much I can do in that situation. And I've got to be careful with what I say, right? Because, this could be someone that's a minor, and I don't know. A lot of the times I don't know. So I got to be very careful what I say. I try to get them through our standard process of collecting information through a form. But oftentimes that doesn't even work because, and when you're in something like this, it's like being underneath a microscope. You can't get away with anything. So the fact that they're reaching out is putting them at risk. And so I just very quickly try and, let them know as quickly as possible that we're here for them. We're always going to be here for them. There's a community. There's nothing wrong with them. And, the unfortunate part about that is that I know what's going to happen to them next, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so that's just kind of the haunting part, the part that kind of keeps me awake at night is that, I have to sit here and tell them that they're going to be okay. And I don't know that. But kind of what my organization, what we're to do is to stand as kind of a beacon of hope, a hope for them as someone's going through this, just kind of telling them that we're here, that there is a community and that there are thousands of people just like them. And that, it's hard. It's very hard. And of course, you don't tell them that, but, just letting them know that there's people there for them, on the other side, as it were, right? And that's really all you can do. You can try reaching out to, local organizations to see what they can do, trying to, do outreach and find things. But at the end of the day, we just all are grasping at strings, and that, not a lot we can do with that. That being said, the education part is, if you know someone that's going through it, or know the parents, I should say, or the guardians, and you find out, about it, you can do your part as someone to educate them and talk to them about it if you're able to. I do caution you, though, because you do need to take into consideration that this might end up harming the youth. So fair warning there. I would definitely consult some organizations that do work in this area before doing something like that to get the information you need. But it's a touchy subject because there are literally lives at stake at this. And so there's not really one good answer, unfortunately. But those are just some of the things that, you can do.
That was really important, Curtis. Couple of things. So strategies is, I know, Tara, I'm trying to come to an actual strategy and not a legal thing when you literally are asking a VP of advocacy not to advocate in the legal way. So strategies, a couple of things. One is, first message almost every single time when a person calls Trevor Project is, you are not alone. It's one of the very first things that a person gets. And as I told you in my story, as you've heard from multiple of us, as you heard from Matt as the first answer to this, it is turning a person into a person. You are not alone because of other people who have experienced this. That would have given me the quote unquote fortitude of, I can get through this because other people got through it too. I am with Curtis. I do not recommend going into how negative it could be, because of the very clear problem of you could be dooming that person to think, well, okay, a sad statistic as an aside that we all need to recognize is that according to the Trevor Project's research, 57% of trans and non-binary youth who have gone through conversion therapy will attempt suicide this year alone. That is unacceptable, but that is not a statistic that you should be sending to a person about to go through conversion therapy, because you are now creating this idea of true harm that they may not be able to get through. So first, let them know that they are not alone. Second, we have good friends even here on the message with us from National Center for Lesbian Rights. I am they do some good work in the legal way of helping out if they can. So if there's a way to legally do it, I know you said not, I can talk about laws, but you didn't say I couldn't talk about lawyers. Tara. So I think that if you can get a great lawyer like National Center for Lesbian Rights, that would be great. third, last but not least, is, and I say this with like full boasting, have them call the Trevor Project. We are literally trained in this exact type of response. So thetrevorproject.org/help. We literally receive calls of kids about to be put into people about to be put into conversion therapy, in the, like, who are in conversion. We have had folks calling us from the camp, right? That's a risk, but they figure out a way to do it, right? Because welcome to text and chat services. You don't always know where the texts are coming from. So they've had people, who have done it before conversion therapy, directly in conversion therapy, or after conversion therapy. We are trained. We are the world's largest organization specifically trained for this exact scenario. I am not able to go through all of those strategies, Tara. I know I wish I could go through more, because not all of you are trained. And legitimately, there's a lot there's like literally 40 hours worth of training that would go into that exact response. Your big thing should be exactly what Curtis just mentioned as a space, which is also get them to the people who can help, right? Like, get them, as an ally, our major work has to be to get people to the help that can be there. I think Matt raised in well about the people person. So you're not alone. Call the lawyers. Love you, Michael. And right, like, call the lawyers of NCLR, and then make sure to call the Trevor Project. We are there as your surge of mental health support that works to save lives each and every day. So those would be some strategies that I would say in this work. Thank you, Michael, for sharing the legal helpline. It's in the chat.
Yeah, I really want to echo, like, okay, so everyone on this panel, having survived conversion therapy, is like, these are really tough human beings, right? All of us have had to go through something and have made it out on the other side, standing on our own 2 feet within our own identities. And like, I shout out to Curtis Galloway, because it takes a lot for our organization and him specifically to have to go through the sorts of messages that we get. And like, for me, there's almost like a mama bear instinct that takes over, where I'm like, I cannot let, like, any other child, because again, as Sam said, we know what they're going to go through. Like, we're fully aware of what's about to happen to them, and it's almost like fight or flight kicks in for me, and I'm all fight, where I just want to like go swoop them up, and like save them. But you really can't. Curtis is entirely right. Your hands are so very tied. Like, your responsibility is very limited. And a good strategy we've been developing at Conversion Therapy Dropout Network is naming and shaming, which, like, if shame works for religious institutions that are trying to get you to act differently, how can that same process not work against an organization who's committing child abuse? So rooting out, finding these conversion therapists, broadcasting that they're still engaging in conversion therapy, really letting it develop into a media firestorm, and allowing public consciousness to raise such that, like, they can go after these people socially. I mean, that's one way of doing it. And if we're talking strategy, there's my contribution.
All right, thank you everyone so much. And I just want to throw in a personal note. Often the term reparative therapy is used as opposed to conversion therapy. Folks like Linda Seiler and other, quote, advocates of reparative therapy use this term. And I just want to stress that there is nothing to repair. Our community is not broken, right? And so passing on that message to youth and adults who feel that they are broken because of their orientation, sexuality, gender orientation, presentation, etc. I think that's a really big point that we can make when we're trying to help individuals. So anyway, I'm a moderator, not a panelist. I'm going to move on. Okay.
I'd like to point out that they're now using restorative therapy is now the one that I'm seeing a lot. I use conversion therapy because I had to obviously stick with one and keep it. But yeah, all of the above. It's got many facets and many names, but it's all the same kind of abuse.
And reintegration therapy, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, that one too.
All right, so let's breathe for a second. Whew. We've got some water, some coffee, some wine, whatever. Take a deep breath, and we're going to move on. This next question is pretty long. All right, here we go. Many conversion therapy survivors do not reveal that they are a survivor, or they are not able to talk about their experience due to extreme emotional response. And this is something that Sam made very clear to us when we began this difficult conversation. Okay? How did you, panelists, get to a point where you were able to talk about it? And what advice do you have for others who wish to tell their story but struggle with telling it? Okay? So we're going to get back into our alphabetical order, and we're going to start with Matt.
Okay. So a lot of people don't know this part about my story too. I used to live in Dallas, Texas before I moved back to Toronto. I lived in Dallas, Texas because a lot of conversion therapists are actually there. And I tried. I was actually sexually assaulted. And I moved back, and I just felt like I had to talk about it. But like, I also felt like my story was so extreme that I couldn't hold it in. But I didn't even know who to go to because it was like nobody really wanted to hear it at that time. And so I was just living my life, like trying to get ahead, trying to like focus on my mental health, was making a lot of headways. And then, because I always wanted to share my story. And then the movie Boy Erased came out. And then the summer, like literally the summer, I was watching the preview on YouTube or something. And I said, oh my God, they're making a movie out of my story. And I was like, what? So I met Garrett. I watched the movie. Struggled through that movie. If anybody has seen the movie, it is hard to watch. But that was kind of my healing by going to the media and being able to share something that I know for myself was harmful. It's not my only form of healing. So disclaimer. A lot of people that are in advocacy spaces tend to use the media, especially former conversion therapists, but I'm not going to get into that, as ways that they can use that as a free therapist, which is not a healthy way to do things at all. What I would highly recommend is to get yourself centered first. Like I was saying, 2 things that people are looking for. Know who they are, be in tune with themselves. As soon as you're in tune with yourself, and as soon as you're able to like figure out what you're feeling and really hone in onto your core emotions, you'll be okay. And just it's a constant reminder. You're constantly reminding yourself that these are my emotions, and to like try to get yourself centered as much as possible. And I'm not a pro at getting myself centered, that's for sure. But if anybody knows me.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. Will you drop the title of that movie into the chat so that people can refer to it later on? All right, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to Sam. Would you like me to read the question again, or are you good?
I mean, I think it's a very important question. It's one that I think a lot of us struggle with a lot. I say this a lot. I'm sure I said this when I first met Curtis and Clare at conferences or otherwise. it is my right to share my story, not your right to hear it. And that is how I live my survivor life. Is there are going to be times and days that I cannot do this work publicly because of the emotional strain that it takes. To be super clear, my brain is already counting down the clocks. I have 16 more minutes, and then my brain is telling myself that emotionally I can get through those 16 more minutes, and then I am going to eat so much ice cream tonight, right? Like, that is because it's hard. It's hard to do this work, and we have to take care of ourselves. So how did I get to this point? I love that Claire called us all the champions but for doing it. It did not start that way, right? I started with a short video of, welcome to a person who had gone through conversion therapy and really hadn't ever reintegrated with LGBTQ life, thought that I was still the only LGBT person. When I told my story, I legitimately thought that most people went through conversion therapy as a kid. And so I was just like, this is my experience. And you're just watching this reporter's face just drop in front of you. And you're like, oh, this may not be as common as I thought it was. Oops. But it was also really hard for me to share that. And I had to start learning of ways to take care of myself and share only what I needed to. So if you'll notice, Tara, when you asked the question, and also when you asked the first personal history, I gave you a super condensed version. I have been, New York Times widely shared op-ed. I have been CNN. I've done this story thousands of times, but I've now gotten it to the part where you know what? You get the story that I tell you. You get the limit to what I am ready to tell you today, because that's all you needed to know. You didn't need to know every detail about my pain. You needed to know what was going to get us to the next part of this conversation. I love that so much of this has been around faith. Personally, that's been we've had really good dialogue about that. But it didn't have to center around my aversion, right? That was really hard. What is the effect of it, my story? I absolutely, when I started this work, definitely still had suicidal tendencies. I am really proud to say that I work for a mental health organization that will not let me share my story if I have had suicidal tendencies within the last 6 months. That is a really important aspect, is that I am not at risk. There is nothing at risk when I'm doing this work. Well, no, sorry, to be clear, there is always risk. There's always risk. But I am told, this is a really important space. If you are having those, you don't need to worry about sharing your story, because you're going to be safe. Your safety matters most, right? I love this. I promise this isn't just because they invited me, but CTDN's direct mandate that every survivor deserves mental health care is what we should all be aiming for as an entire LGBT movement. I hear from survivors every single week because I'm hearing from them in times of crisis. So you will never know their stories. They will never be not never. They are not right now the stories that are going to be on the New York Times op-eds, because that's not the place for them right now. They need care. They need support and love. So how did I get from that point to here? I got care. I got support. I got love. Anyone who knows me knows that I share everything on my social media. My life is an open book. And that is terrifying to some in the movement and great to some others. I'll tell you why I do it. Because on Monday, I was having a really hard day. As a survivor, I was having a really hard day. And so I posted a photo of strawberries with sprinkles on them. It is the simplest photo in the frickin' world. And yet hundreds of people shared their love and affection. And I hope your day gets a little bit better. And also, that's a great idea. I'm going to start eating sprinkles on strawberries, right? That was actually a way of my self-care, because it was helping other people around me tell me, you're not alone. Yeah, we're also having really hard days. And you know what? If we solve that with sprinkles on strawberries, brava, right? We don't have to have intense systems of care. We have to have a community looking out for us. So that was probably a little preachy, sorry. But the short answer is, it wasn't always easy. I've had really bad moments where I didn't take care of myself. I am I am grateful to have the man upstairs who is like, Sam, will you please get off this call? My husband, who looks out for me and tells me to go take a nap when the days get too long at the Trevor Project with these hard moments, right? And says, you cannot save lives if you are giving all of your own. So that is what I leave my survivor, story process is never share your story more than the care that you're giving yourself. Never do that, because there will always be another, press opportunity. There will always be another school to talk to. There will always be another conversation over a dinner table, but not if you're not there. So you have to take care of you first. Selfish and fabulous. Boom. Mic drop. I don't have a mic, but whatever.
We're all cheering. We're all cheering. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you to everyone that is here and that is sharing these stories. And you make an amazing, incredible, and extremely relevant point, because we cannot always talk about these things, right? And we cannot help anybody else or make any advancements in policy, law, etc., right, if our own cup is not full. So, yes, absolutely. All right, we're going to move on to Curtis. Curtis, do you want me to read the question, or are you good?
No, I've pulled it up over here, so I'm following along. Yeah, no, that was really good. The strawberries look good too, by the way. I don't comment on a lot of things because I'm one of those Facebook creeps, but they look good. No, this is something that I see a lot of. And to Sam's point, yes, we do advocate for conversion therapy survivors to get mental health they need. We do absolutely give a disclaimer that we are not their mental health primary outlet if they need an actual professional to help them. That is not what we do. We hold community space, and that also can be a form of mental health healing, but we do not take the place of an actual licensed counselor or therapist that is trained. So a lot of what I find in the work that our organization does is that we have a lot of people that come to us that either didn't know that there were other survivors out there, or they've never talked about it before. And so one of the things that I really focus on all of our events, we've got our Survivor Sunday, which is like a roundtable thing. And we have survivors come and they share. And I always put the disclaimer in there that it's, you can sit in our chat room and you can just not say a thing. You don't have to answer questions. You don't have to participate. You can just be there. And I find most of the time people do have something to say once the conversation gets going. But that's to keep in mind that some people are not comfortable telling their story. And there are people that don't want to share their story. They'll add comments, but they don't want to engage by telling their personal story, which is absolutely fine. We do hope they get to that point, but for some people, they're never going to get there, and that's okay. Just as long as they know that there's a community and they know there are resources available for them should they have a bad day. So for me, getting to the point where I am now, and I think that I had an advantage because my parents, they support me. They support me completely. I can talk to them about anything. They love my partner, love him to death. And they support my organization and are really proud of it. And so it's really, really amazing that happened, but that is absolutely not the case for everyone. In fact, I would say that it's probably a 1 in a million chance that something like that happens. And so I'm very thankful for that. And that really helped. But for me, getting to the point where I'm able to talk about it and base an entire organization around it is just having someone to talk to about it and to reconcile my feelings about it and be able to express that and get closure. And that was what it was for me. I know Tara said you didn't want any accolades for that, but you were a big part of that, huge part of that. And that's what I try to recreate for people that may not have that with the groups that we do, is just creating a space where they can come and talk about what they want. I always say that we're community led, and that's because if someone comes in and says, I want to talk about sprinkle covered strawberries today, then that's what we're going to talk about with them. It's very open, but I understand it's very hard. Lately we've been getting a lot of adults come to our sessions that have never talked about it before, that have never had a community specifically for this situation for survivors. And so they come to us just kind of as like, well, where do I start? I'm like, well, you're here. That's where you start. And you move at your own pace. And so I think my biggest advice is just take it however you want. You know, if you never share your conversion therapy survivor story and you're never comfortable talking about it, fine. That's fine. You don't have to be. But I think that as we go along through everything that's happening and conversion therapy is being brought to more light, we're going to have a lot more people that are like, oh, well, that's what happened to me. And, you know, I see when that happens, I've seen it before where people are like, yeah, actually, you know, this happened to me and I want to do something about it. Like, what do I do? And so, you know, I kind of just, you know, tell them they need to take care of themselves first. There are resources and there are therapists, and, you know, that you can message us at any time. And there are other, you know, professionals that are out there like Trevor Project that you can talk to all the time, please. Because it is hard and it can be very touchy subject, because some people, I mean, you can be happy one moment and then all of a sudden they just are re-traumatized like that. And so we got to be very careful about that. But, you know, just having community and having an outlet to express it is what helped me get to the point. Mine was a little bit different because I jumped right into activism. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I can use my story to help people. This is what I need to do because I'm able to, and not everyone's going to be able to. So it's up to the individual and taking it at their own pace.
Yes, big snaps and cheers. Thank you so much, Curtis. I want to give a shout out before we move on to Claire here to each and every one of the individuals on this panel for taking these moments of pain and these experiences of negativity and switching them and turning them into something positive where you have a platform to help others. Right? All right, Claire, would you like me to read the question or are you good?
As I understood the questions, like the gist of it is how did you get here? Like, how did you get to this point? Is that, am I correct in assuming that? Yes? No?
That is the crux of the biscuit, yes.
Okay, cool. So, as I said, let's dig in a little deeper here. I'm feeling comfortable tonight. I'm actually going to go visit my mother tomorrow, so I might as well process this now and get very real with myself. So when I was 14, it was about 2009, my parents would ship me up to the dark church basement of some St. Louis hole in the wall, and Jim Venice would administer something called the cup method, which basically posits, I mean, all of these are quack theories that these conversion therapists are using, right? But the cup method essentially is that everyone has a cup, and mine was filled with the wrong things. That God wanted our cups to be filled with this, and this, and that my cup was filled with the wrong things, that I had paid too much attention to women, that I was coddled too much by my mother, neglected by my father, that I had let my friends and society and all of these other things take the place of God in my heart. And like, I went through some pretty brutal, what I consider like physical, psychological, and emotional torture practices. Like, there was behavioral modification, like my head got shaved. I wasn't, like, my movements wound up being restricted. I was monitored all of the time. I basically I've been for years since I was an infant, raised in a church where the highest level of interrelation among human beings is unconditional love. And that's what we're supposed to be parroting, right? And my parents had always told me, like, we love you unconditionally. Like, our love for you is a reflection of God's love for all of us. And in the process of conversion therapy, that was fundamentally just destroyed, eviscerated. Like, I walked away from that experience and was in that experience, never really like being able to trust love again after that. Like, I didn't think it existed for the longest time. And so I'm really sad to say, but for a long time I became bitter. Like, I was probably the most bitter teenager, the most bitter young adult you could have come across. I mean, I was very nasty, and I would externalize all of the pain and all of the feelings of being unloved, or internalize them. It was always one of those two things. And it would never be productive, right? Like, I would never be engaged in moments of self-reflection. I would either be taking out the pain on myself or taking out the pain on others. And it was so toxic that I would hurt myself, or I would like emotionally hurt the people who tried to get close to me. And shout out to my wonderful husband, Benjamin, for one, being able to put up with me, and then two, just writing it out, loving me in spite of myself and my trauma. I credit being able to get to the point where I was able to share my story to him in a lot of therapy. Like, people who have doctorates in psychology administering therapy to me. And I would not be as well adjusted, considering, like, given the givens, if it weren't for that. I also came across, I started sharing my story online at first out of bitterness. I was very angry at my parents. My father wound up coming down with cancer, and so it was stage 4 colorectal cancer. And my mother would not let me come home to see him because I was not living according to like God's will. And so he wound up passing away, and we had not reconciled. And during that process where like my family was going through a lot of emotions, me included, I started to like, again, go through a process of naming and shaming everyone in my life who'd really like, in the small town that I grew up in, that had allowed something like this to happen, that had permitted it, that knew about it and just let it fester, or who put me in positions where I was subject to what I was internalizing as child abuse. And so, like, that led me to meet someone named Cynthia Wenfield, and she is the author of Gender Identity, The Ultimate Teen Guide. And she wanted to use my story in that book in order to like give parents an idea of how them doing the wrong thing can wind up making their children feel. And it's imperative to try to get it right to the best of your ability for your child's sake. And I credit her with really helping me find the language and giving me the chance to externalize and weaponize my own story for good and productively. Like, I had finally found an outlet, and it gave me a language after I sat down and like really intentionally written about it with that in mind, to go out and talk to other people about it, you know? And then, you know, maybe a year or 2 or 3, I can't remember exactly how many years it was between that, I wound up meeting Curtis. In between that, I wound up doing a bit of lecturing at SIUC and at high schools and local GSAs about my experience. But I came across Tara at the first SI Pride, and she introduced me to Curtis. And then Curtis had this idea for Conversion Therapy Dropout Network. And since then, Curtis has given me the wonderful ability to use my story to help others, to have an emotional impact. And I just want to thank him so much for all the work that he's doing, and to help me be a better person and help others be better too.
Wow, thank you so much, Claire. I'm going to give 2 or 3 minutes and allow other panelists to give you some feedback there.
I mean, just a lot of love. It's not easy to turn trauma into power, in many ways that can go the opposite direction. Trauma can cause more trauma. And I love that Claire mentioned it, right? Like that we take it out on those whom we love. It is the hardest part of trauma, is that we generally hurt those whom we love. So brava to you for, if alchemy was trying to change lead into gold, right? You turned the lead story into a golden opportunity to make a difference and save lives.
From conversion therapy survivors to thrivers, I just feel like this panel is like a testament of people that not only that they made it out, but they're just following their passions on stuff that is harmful to them, and to make a change. All we're wanting to do is to be open and accepting for who we are, and that's all. It's as much as it's so complicated to like have that, it's like and to like fight these laws and fight these battles, it's so simple that we can just do that within ourselves. And so like to have like a community base and just like everybody else around, and just like having this community like the community Conversion Therapy Dropout Network, it's very beautiful to see that we can all thrive together. That's what it's all about.
I had a comment, but I'm just kind of like speechless about it. I don't really know what to say other than you're all fabulous, and I'm glad that you're here. You know, makes me feel good to know that people do appreciate this entity, as it were, that I've created, working. So yeah, so just thank you for all being there. Thank you, Claire, and yeah, I just speechless about it.
Well, even though I'm still talking, I also am speechless about everything that everyone has shared here. I'm going to move into kind of what I'm thinking is a lightning round, so to speak. There's a list of shorter questions, and I'm going to pose them to each panelist individually, and then we'll move on to the next. And I'm actually going to start with Sam on this one because there are some time restraints involved. So, Sam, let's get ready for this. What advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
Ooh, 10, oh my gosh. So 10 years ago, I was in the midst of MIT getting graduate degrees in nuclear engineering. So I'd be like, run, girl, run. But other than that, in general, I think I would have started to recognize that there's a lot of way to be an activist. I think I was prepping to, you know, I was thinking about how to be an activist and thinking that I had to be on the front lines. And I'm really finding it's pretty cool. Front lines is bad language, sorry. I'm finding that it's really powerful to kind of be a person who can support and raise up the great voices, like my fellow panelists. I think Matt said it perfectly, which is, for a person who has been doing this now for a very long time, I think it actually probably has been nearly a decade of this work. This is the very first time I've been on a panel this diverse. That is huge as a moment because it's showing where we're going. It's showing that the movement is saying all voices have to be raised because all of our traumas are different and we need to be figuring out how to serve each of them specifically. I know that you're doing lightning round, and I think we talked about this privately. I apologize to the rest of my panelists. I very much gave myself only till 8:30 emotionally, and we're past that in my world. My husband's also probably going to like get off the phone so you can actually start enjoying my my weekend. So I don't leave you. I know each of you very well. I end my question of what would I do 10 years ago is doing what I'm doing right now. I would have taken care of myself and said, this is how much you can do, and I am proud of you for doing that. And with that, I am grateful to each and every one of you for all the amazing love that you continue to show the world and for the great things that you do. So, and thank you, Tara, for being such a great hostess.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you.
Bye, Sam.
Good night. We appreciate you. That was amazing. All right, I'm going to go on up to Matt. Now, Matt, there are actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions that are lightning round. Okay, so we're going to start with the same one that we just had with Sam. What advice would you give to yourself 10 years ago?
So that's a big question. So if somebody was to ask that to me, I was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was succumbed to trying to get the love of my dad. And essentially the reason why that this conversion therapy thing was even a thing is because I wanted to get the love and acceptance of my dad again. One of the things that I would say to myself is, what are the messages that you say within yourself? Because having homophobia from conversion therapy is one thing, and having a family is just that extra layer. So my dad is a Jamaican man, and culturally speaking, had this language that he would just be disrespecting gay people because it's something culturally different than what he was used to when he was living in Jamaica. So the messages that I would say to myself is, what do you think about yourself, and how do you represent you the best way that you can? I think that is the most important, at least for me. So thank you for the question.
Awesome. All right. Keeping this moving, and you kind of already answered this, but how has advocacy shaped your character?
Me again? It's made me it's made me resilient. Like I I kind of I deal with things head on. I'm known to be a fighter and a lover. But I just I see injustices and I speak out against it, and I happen to know about the subject that has affected me, and so I'll do whatever I can to like say my truth in it and speak out against injustices.
Awesome. All right. I think this feeds into the next question. What are some challenges that you face in advocacy work?
Okay, so I feel that we all need to be together in this. I don't think people understand how organized conversion therapy is. It is organized. They're really organized. They communicate with each other. They all have the structural functionalist mindset. Everybody is in that same sect, in that same sphere. I would like, what I would like to see is organizations be more organized and not to make it a fame thing, but to like go into the direction of what is this, or how is this going to benefit all of us long term? And that's what I feel.
All right, wonderful. Okay. So what are you currently working on?
That's a secret. So essentially, I am currently working on Bill C8, which is the most comprehensive bill so far in the world. I actually have it up. Just give me a second here. May I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. How do I do that? Sorry. View. I have to have permissions. Okay, so I'll read this off. So, we did the first reading of Bill C8 on March 9th of 2020, before the COVID-19 pandemic. So here's the summary of amending the criminal code to create the following offenses. This is the conversion therapy bill that our government is working on, which I feel that it needs to be expanding a little bit more to adults. But I'll get into that in just a sec. And to trans and non-binary folks as well, which we have an activist, Erica Muse, who is currently working on that, and she just had a report out today. I'm actually going to share it on my social media because Erica was having a really hard time, and her voice deserves to be amplified because she is such an amazing person. So the summary of the enactment amends the criminal code to, among other things, create the following offenses. A, causing a person to undergo conversion therapy against a person's will.
Yes.
B, causing a child to undergo conversion therapy. C, doing anything for the purpose of removing a child from Canada with the intention that the child undergo conversion therapy outside of Canada. B, advertising an offer to provide conversion therapy. And E, receiving a financial or other material benefit for the provision of conversion therapy. So those are all 5 things that we have that the government has presented under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that we would be able to present to the government, but we want to make sure that it's tighter on gender identity, because that's gender identity and gender affirming care is necessary. So thank you.
Sarah, I think we might have. Uh-oh.
Sorry, did I just say a whole bunch of stuff and nobody heard me?
Yeah.
Yes.
What I said was, Matt, thank you so much. That was awesome. And if you could share that with us, and not only to our panelists, but also all of our attendees. And I know we are over time. Those of you who are willing to hang out with me and stick this through the end, I appreciate your presence. Anybody that needs to take off, feel free. I want to get the rest of our work out there so that we can offer this recording to folks who could not be there with us, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and move on to Curtis. Now, this is lightning round, and I think I have 4 questions. Canada Dry. All right, Curtis, what advice would you give to yourself 10 years ago?
Ooh, well, 10 years ago, actually, this is going to be 10 years of being out of the closet this year. Probably just that I would tell myself that there's a whole community of people out there that are just like you. There are other queer people out there just like you, and it's gonna be okay. You're gonna be fine. You can handle anything that life throws at you. That's essentially what I would tell myself.
Okay, how has advocacy shaped your character?
It's definitely made me a lot more outspoken and outgoing. One of the things with the advocacy is you have to be very outgoing. You have to be very assertive. And if you're, if you're not either of those things in some capacity, then you're probably not going to go too far with advocacy, at least not in the type that I've been involved in. There are other types that you could, but it's definitely made me more outspoken and communicatively more aggressive.
All right, thank you. What are some challenges that you face in advocacy work?
A lot of self-doubt. I get a lot of self-doubt, specifically around like organizational things and like reaching out, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I talking to the right people? Am I, did I say the right thing to this survivor that just came to me and said they've never told anybody before? That's kind of my biggest challenge, that, and try not to get overly angry when I find out about conversion therapy practices. And that's another thing, the challenges of, helping others. we're very limited in what we can do, but we talked about that a little bit. So those are the two big challenges. And I think that a lot of the self-doubt that I have is a result of my conversion therapy. And it's something that even today, 10 years later, I'm still dealing with and still have to work through.
Thank you. All right. And what are you currently working on?
So right now we are looking to expand. We're trying to get more chapters, as it were. We've got our thing called Survivor Sunday, which is like a round table of conversion therapy survivors that come together and they just talk about what the topic is. Like, for instance, this month is Pride and Prosperity, right? It's this Sunday, and we're going to be talking about how you get to a point. Specifically, we're going to be talking about kind of the last question, like getting to a point where you can talk about it and be proud of your status as a survivor, right? So I'm proud of my status as a survivor because I know that I've been able to use my story for good, right? And so this one's talking about that and discussing with people on, any questions they may have about how did you work through this? I'm feeling this way. Did you ever feel like this? And then we're also, we're looking to kind of take that Survivor Sunday and package it up and ship it off to other places, along with other things. Organization-wise, we're growing. So we finally got our trademark back, so we're excited about that. Insurance is good stuff to have, and looking to really expand and start to help more people. We found that there's a community in England that has that's starting to find us. So we've had multiple people over there reach out to us. So that's pretty exciting that we're going global, as it were, in a matter of speaking.
All right, that is some amazing work that you're doing. Okay, Claire, are you ready? We're going to do lightning round. What advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
Is this me, Romney? What advice I'd give myself 10 years ago, I was in, the thick of it. I was undergoing persecution, and I knew that I was strong enough to hack it. But I would want to tell myself that I'm so much stronger than I could even ever imagine, and that I'm going to be able to be the person that I want to be when I'm older. I'm going to be so fierce, so much fiercer than I ever thought I could be. And I'm going to be loved and desired for who I am in ways I thought not possible at the time.
Right, and how has advocacy shaped your character?
Would you repeat that, please?
How has advocacy shaped your character?
Oh, I would say it's made me resilient. So when you're an advocate for something, it's because there's a system in place that's allowed an injustice to develop and take root. So you're having to challenge that system. And oftentimes it's a really big behemoth of a beast. And you're just one person. And I think that it's given me the language to be able to challenge authority. It's, made me funnier. I think I've got a little bit more levity to myself now. I can brush things off a little easier. Really pick myself up. I'm stronger for sure.
Amazing. All right. So it looks like a lot of our panelists are pretty well exhausted from this very deep and intense discussion that we've had. I am not seeing a lot of response in the chat, and that is fine. I have provided my email address. So what we will do in order to wrap this up this evening is there will be a recording that goes out to everyone who is registered. We will also post that publicly in a few of our different social mediums. If anyone has questions, send them to me. I will forward them to the panelists so we follow up a little bit more thoroughly. And I'm so thrilled and appreciative of each and every one of you who have been here with us this evening. Great thanks to Sam. Huge thanks to Matt. You've brought us a different perspective, especially regarding legislation, being in a different part of the globe, so to speak. Huge thanks to Curtis huge thanks to Claire. Does anyone have any final words before we close up?
Thank you all so much for being here with us, for sharing this moment with us, for allowing us the space to talk to you about it, and for being interested, because it's people like you who spread the word that this is something that's actually happening, that does still go on, and is really like doing your due diligence that can help make a change. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you everyone. It's been really great. Very, very happy to have shared the space with Rainbow Cafe and Southern Illinois Pride Fest, as well as Trevor Project. Super great. I love that we have people represented all across the North American continent. So it's pretty great. I love it.
Final words is, we are survivors. We're thrivers. We did this. We are in harnessing an energy that is positive with people that with panelists that love each other. You know what? That is a win. That is something that they cannot take away from us. We did this. You did this. Conversion Therapy Dropout Network has done this. Thank you, guys.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I don't know if you can see or not. I have unmuted my video so I can tell everybody good night in person. I know we dealt with some tech issues at the beginning of the recording. Apparently, out here in rural Southern Illinois, I don't get to have video and voice at the same time. But I appreciate everybody working through all of this with us. And again, to our attendees, I will send all the information to you. So everybody have a good night. Thank you again so much for our panelists. This has been extremely deep and heartfelt. So have a good night.